find Will.
Welcome to the Gaza Forum. I'm calling it Gaza Forum 2.0. The first one, we saw all three of these gentlemen at the Gaza Forum 1.0, and they now are our elected officials. So I would like to welcome everyone, especially our guest, which is House District 5 Congressman-elect Zach Dugan. Give him a wave, Zach. State District 2 Senator Jeff Taylor has joined us. He used to be our senator. And now we have State District 3 Congressman-elect Lynn Evans. Other officials are Bryan County supervisors. I saw Dan Frederickson, and I saw Tim Obermeyer here. Oh, Tim's in the front. Dan, where did you find? Oh, there he is. Okay, wallflower. So we are very happy that you are here. And I'm also excited that we have a contingent of younger people here. We have, I know, Abby Stout and Will Stout, and we're happy you're here to be involved in the political process. Thank you. Further, I want to have special thanks to the organizers of the Gaza Forum. You wouldn't believe it if I told you who they were. A bunch of gentlemen that meet early in the morning at an undisclosed location at an undisclosed place, and they do a fabulous job. So we're thankful for them, and we're thankful for our host, the Producers Co-op here in Gaza. Thank you all for finding Gaza, and I'm sure the weather will be fine. Our format tonight, oh, first of all, I might have. Oh, Megan, welcome.
Sorry I'm late. My kids had school team and acrobatics, and it just didn't get over in time for me to make it to that room, so I made it, so I'm a little late.
Megan, introduce your which district you're in, please.
Sure. Yeah. So Megan Jones, I represent basically most of University County and most of Clay County, basically Spencer to Swan.
Thank you, Megan. We're happy that you're all here. I also want to say I am not the moderator. The moderator, unfortunately, I mean, I guess I am the moderator pro tem or the moderator, whatever, but she got sick this afternoon, so you have me. Okay? I'm Denise. All right. So this is what we're going to do tonight. We will allow the representatives to introduce themselves and inform us of your committee assignments. Okay? That's very important. And then we'll have the senior elected officials here. Jeff Taylor, I guess kind of is who we talked to, will describe the process that an idea goes to the committee, how it progresses to vote, and what happens. And if you have something to add to that, that would be fabulous also, Megan. And if you've not done so yet, please enter your questions, comments, or concerns on the pieces of paper provided, and there's pencils. Give them to the moderator. A gentle reminder to please address only state-specific issues. And as moderator, I will, at my discretion, interrupt if I feel you're getting off topic or headed in an inappropriate direction. So please submit the questions. As time allows, we'll have time after the submitted questions for you to come up and grab a mic and ask a specific question. So let's start. Senator Taylor, do you want to go ahead and start? Introduce yourself, your committee assignments. Thank you.
You have to, it'll say on there.
Does that? Yeah.
Oh, I think it is now.
You just have to push the button. So I am Jeff Taylor, and as our moderator said, I represent District 2 in the Iowa Senate. My district has changed. It had included Bryan County and Cherokee County, but coming in the next 2 sessions, starting in January, I'm going to be representing Sioux County, Lyon County, and the northern half of Plymouth County. And my committee assignments, I am on the Education Committee. I'm the Vice Chair of the Education Committee. I am also serving on the Judiciary Committee, the Workforce Committee, the Technology Committee, and the Appropriations Committee. And part of being on the Appropriations Committee is that I am going to be the chair of the Education Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee, and that's the central part in the Senate that comes up with funding for public education, K-12, and also the universities and community colleges on the Senate side. So that's what I'm up to.
Zach Deacon, so the new District 5 that was created this last go-around when they voted on redistricting. So all of Osceola, all of O'Brien County, and an eastern chunk of Cherokee, which is a sliver of Wayne and Vista County. So that'll be a new district, and I'll represent all of that. I live over by Granville, just barely in the district, so on the I'm on the right side of the road, so to speak. So, but anyway, committees are Ag, Environmental Protection, and Public Safety, which is kind of a duh. But yeah, so I look forward to serving on all those committees, hopefully giving some form of expertise, whatever I might have or not have on some of those committees. And then I am Vice Chair for the Environmental Protection Committee.
So May Jones, I chair the Administrative Rules Review Committee, which is a little bit different than a policy or budget subcommittee because we meet year-round and we are responsible for making sure that the bureaucrats write rules that comply with the laws that we pass. So oftentimes we will see bureaucrats writing rules that directly contradict what the legislature put into code, and so it's my job to help keep them in line. So serve on administrative rules. I am a lawyer by trade. I am no longer practicing, so like my friend over here on public safety, I get put on the Judiciary Committee, and then I also serve on Ways and Means. And then this year, I will be back on Environmental Protection. I chair the Environmental Protection Committee my third and fourth year in the legislature. And back on that, and then I'm also, for the first time, I am on the Agriculture Committee, which I'm married to a farmer, and so that's a little bit different realm for me to be in, but certainly I can provide a unique experience in the farm industry. So,
my name is Glenn Evans. I represent District 3, Iowa Senate, which is all of Buena Vista County, eastern half of Cherokee County, includes the city of Cherokee, all of O'Brien County, all of Osceola County, and Clay County, including Spencer. Committee assignments, they must think that I need a heavy workload. I'm on the Education Committee, Natural Resources Committee, Health and Human Services, Judiciary, Ethics, and I'm also on the Education Appropriations. So looking forward to going down and getting started. And so far the process has been amazing. I've had to pick Senator Taylor's brain a couple times, as well as a few others. So I hope he doesn't get tired of me bending his ear when I'm trying to figure out the waters a little bit.
So Senator Taylor, if you want to kind of describe an idea, goes to committee, what happens in the committee, what the reconciliation and voting process is.
Sure. So I met a few weeks back with the group that sponsors the forum here, and talking about it, we thought, well, it might be helpful just to spend a few minutes explaining how the process works, because not everybody understands. I certainly didn't before I entered the legislature understand how it works. So just real quick, there's lots of bills that are introduced by senators and representatives on both sides of the Capitol. And a bill works through each chamber, so the House chamber and the Senate chamber. It has to work its way through if it's going to have any chance of becoming a law. And so the first step is, based upon what policy area that it's found in, it's assigned to a committee, and the committee chair, usually, especially if it's a Republican bill, and Republicans control both the Senate and the House, normally a subcommittee is held, and a subcommittee consists of 2 members of the majority party, the Republicans, and 1 Democrat. And you get together and you learn a little bit about that bill. We're not always experts even in the areas of the bills that we introduce, so it's educational for us. But then also it's a public hearing, so the public, either in person at the Capitol or through Zoom, can participate in each of those subcommittee meetings, and they serve the role of a a public hearing as well. And then in order for that bill to move forward, 2 of the 3 members have to approve it. And usually if it's a Republican bill, it moves forward, right? And at least it gets to the next step. And that's the full committee. And at that point, if the Republican majority on that committee support that bill, then it will be brought up in open session, and it will be discussed and perhaps debated and voted on. And if it moves forward out of the committee, then it eventually gets to be placed in a kind of a waiting area where you hope that your bill will make it to the floor of the Senate or the House. But it's really up to the discretion of the leader, the Speaker of the House or the Majority Leader of the Senate. They really get to decide whether or not your bill, even though it passed a committee, is going to be voted on by the entire chamber. And if it is, and it passes, then you have to have the same process going on the other side of the Capitol. So if it was a Senate bill, the House has to go through the same process. And in the end, if the bills are the same, that's great. It can, if it passes the Senate and the House, it can go directly to the governor for her signature, hopefully. If the bills end up being slightly different, which sometimes they do, then you have to reconcile that, and it has to go back to one of the chambers to say, okay, here's the final product, because you have to send one piece of legislation with one set of language to the governor to sign, where she always has the option of vetoing it too if it's something that she rejects. But at least Governor Reynolds doesn't veto very many Republican bills that pass the legislature. So we're sitting in a good position from the Republican point of view. Democrats, it's much more of a challenge to try to get legislation passed through the chambers. It's very difficult. Every now and then there'll be a Democrat bill that will make it through the House or Senate, but that tends to be the exception rather than the rule. So things are fairly partisan at the Capitol. And even though I think that's not always the best way of running the government, that's the system that we've got, and the Democrats play the game the exact same way when they're in charge. So you kind of stick with your party usually, but every now and then there'll be a bill that we just can't approve individually, and we may have to vote against the rest of our party members in opposition to a bill. But that's the exception rather than the rule. So anyway.
So I think that's interesting, the context of realizing that just because, okay, your committee assignments are important, but even being in the committee doesn't necessarily mean that it will be brought to floor, even though maybe the committee has agreed and crafted something really substantive. So that's kind of how that works. I think that's interesting. And what I wanted to start with, now that you're elected officials, and 2 of you, something new, the political process becomes interesting at times. Money and political pressure will influence you. I'm sure lobbyists have already been contacting you and trying to sway your thoughts. So I want to take just a few minutes, kind of, I think of interest here is the Iowa Utilities Board. And I want to kind of document some of the things with the Iowa Utilities Board. It's kind of long, but if we listen through it, then we'll get to the question. The Iowa Utilities Board will make final decisions regarding eminent domain. The Iowa Utilities Board is a board of 3 appointees. 2 were appointed by Terry Branstad, and Mr. Branstad works for Summit Carbon Solutions. Richard Lozier is a current IUB board member appointed by Terry Branstad, and Mr. Lozier works for a law firm that represents Dakota Access. Josh Burns, thank you, Megan, was appointed to the Iowa Utilities Board by Governor Reynolds. His daughter is Governor Reynolds' assistant. So influenced by Governor Reynolds is evidence in this case, and that may be concerning because Bruce Rathsetter is the CEO of Summit Carbon Solutions, and he donated $124,898 to Governor Reynolds since 2015, and that's according to OpenSecrets.org. Jeff Boyne is the Summit Pipelines VP of Government and Public Affairs and was Governor Reynolds' Chief of Staff, and Jake Ketzner is Summit Pipelines lobbyist and was Governor Branstad's Chief of Staff. So they've well-positioned power within the Iowa Utilities Board. Further, Governor Reynolds put these people on our carbon sequestering task force, and our task force has Jerry Huesher, which is the IUD board chair, Debbie Durham, which is the Iowa Economic Development Authority Director, Kayla Lyon, who is the Iowa DNR chair, and Scott Maurer, an Iowa DOT director. So strategic influence is being exercised by Summit Pipeline and Navigator on our elected and appointed officials. Now for the question, just a little background. They do that well, they do it well, they position well. Is there anything you can or will attempt to do to protect landowners from eminent domain being exercised by for-profit entities with strong political ties and influence? The question. Who wants to start with that one? Megan, go for it.
So maybe, I'm working. So maybe I can kick this off, and this is just a really difficult circumstance in my position because I am married to a farm legislation in which they are financially impacted. And that's good, right? We do not want sweeper deals by our legislators. So Rule 76 was put into place so that we could not vote to give ourselves a financial gain, right? And so because of that, I cannot vote pursuant to House rules on legislation that deals specifically with the carbon pipeline. Now, moving forward, if there's legislation that talks about future projects, I'm happy to have those discussions because I think those are really important about how we protect landowners from eminent domain, and particularly when we're talking about landowners who are constantly having to their door knocked on, right? We just went through Rock Island Lane Line, and now we're going through this, and some of these same landowners were hit up twice. And so then they're having to hire attorneys, and they're having to defend their property, and they have to be put through this for a second time. So I think, going forward, I think some of those discussions are really positive, and we need to be having those discussions about how we can protect landowners. If there needs to be a certain percentage, I'm fine with that. But as it relates to the carbon pipelines that are currently being proposed through Iowa Utilities Board, I am ethically conflicted out of it.
I'm really thankful that I don't have a conflict. I live on the country, but I don't own farm ground. So I have discussed with some other people on the committee that I'm in to potentially what it might look like to introduce a bill to make it just illegal to pipe CO2 in the state of Iowa. And so that would be a different way of attacking it. I don't think we need to attack it more than just eminent domain. Certainly not less than eminent domain, but I think going at it from a different angle too would be helpful. I feel bad that we have ethanol folks who I think are genuine individuals making a living, and farmers who are genuine individuals making a living, pigeonholed into these options. I really think that the answer is the government shouldn't force you to have these regulations on your ethanol plant. Not, well, we're pro this pipeline because the government is forcing us to be mean. It's like, I feel bad for that because I think that it's deregulation that needs to occur. And I want to be careful how I say this, but I'll say it. There's a lot of people that I've talked to that I'm not convinced to actually care about the environment. It's just the hoop that they have to jump through to continue on, providing for themselves, being in the position that we're in. And that's why I feel bad. But at the end of the day, I still think that it's something that the CO2 pipeline is, in my opinion, disingenuous. It's a money-making scheme. It's another hoop that people have to jump through, and so it needs to be stopped. And I mean, certainly, it shouldn't be less than eminent domain, but there's other angles we need to take. And so if it's eminent domain and we make it illegal to pipe CO2, I don't know, this is an idea that I brought up with some of the constituents, or not constituents, but some of the other reps down there, because I think that that would be an interesting way to think about it too. So, but I'm thankful that on the Environmental Protection Committee that I'm on, there's some solid conservatives on there that are willing to attack this. And so hopefully we can push back against it with that committee, but we'll see what the speaker does.
So I guess in my case, I've listened to the proponents of the pipelines, and there are people who are excited about the possibility. They make the argument that because of the environmental restrictions that the state of California has passed, it's going to become increasingly difficult for ethanol that's produced in our state to meet those requirements unless we have a higher green standard. And that's what's really driving this. Is tax rebates coming out of Washington by the Biden administration, the Green New Deal. That's really what is providing the seed money and the incentive for Navigator and Summit and Wolf, the three CO2 pipeline companies, to engage in this. And some of the farmers in Iowa are happy to receive the payments to grant a voluntary easement to have the pipelines go through their property. They've negotiated a pretty good price for that, and they don't object, and they're not worried about the possible safety hazards of the pipeline. And I can understand all of that, and I can understand the argument that it will help keep the price of corn high, which is, I guess, a two-edged sword, depending on if you're mostly concerned about selling your corn versus having your livestock feeding on the corn, right? It's not always an unmixed blessing to have the price of corn so high. But I can understand all of those arguments, but at the same time, in the end, when it comes down to eminent domain, I think eminent domain is not appropriate for any of these carbon pipeline projects. The Constitution of Iowa and the Constitution of the United States is very clear what eminent domain is. It defines it in terms of when it can be used. It's for public use. That's the phrase, public use. This isn't a public use. There's no public use here at all. It's not the government building it. It's not a public park. It's a public school. It's not a public library. These are pipelines that are going to be laid by private companies, and the product that's transported is not going to the public. Nobody's going to be eating CO2, making use of it in any direct way. This is a completely private enterprise for private profit scheme. And for that reason, I feel like it's unconstitutional for the Iowa Utilities Board to grant eminent domain for these projects. And I think in order to remove the political pressure off the board, which you pointed out some of those pressures, some of those conflicts of interest, which I think are obvious, in order to remove that temptation, but also that pressure off the backs of our utility board members, I think the legislature needs to step in and provide clarity and also say, no, in this particular instance, this is not appropriate. And so I had a bill this past session that would have removed the power of eminent domain for hazardous liquid pipelines from the utilities board. It made it through a subcommittee, but it was killed before it had a full committee vote on the Senate side. And there were two House bills that were similar. Those were also killed on the House side pretty early on in the process. I'm a little more optimistic. There's been a lot more attention. I think a lot of my colleagues on the Senate side, including a number of some of the new senators, have expressed concerns about this. And I'm hoping that among our Republican Senate colleagues, we're going to have a very frank discussion about this. I think if this was not, especially in the case of Summit, if this was not a company that was owned by, managed by a very prominent Republican donor, I don't think we would have the conflict that we have, and then the hesitation of raising the red flag and doing something to step in and protect the property rights of Iowa farmers. I think that's the very least that we can do. And to me, I feel like I'm on good ground in fighting against eminent domain for these projects. And I've got 5 bills that are in the drafting stage right now to address either eminent domain or to protect farmers from harassment. There's a transparency bill that I've got that would say that if you're going to seek eminent domain for pipelines like this, you have to publicize all of your investors, tell us who they are, where they live, what dollar amounts that they have in terms of the investment in these pipelines. I think that's the very least they can do. And to me, this is something that is a Republican Party position. This is, the Republican platform is very clear, no eminent domain from private companies, period. That's the same view of the Iowa Farm Bureau. They have a policy statement, we have a policy statement. I'm a Farm Bureau member myself now. The Farm Bureau has the same position. All 3 county supervisors, boards in the 3 counties I represent have come out publicly registering in opposition to eminent domain for these pipelines. Public opinion polls have shown that Iowans are against eminent domain for these pipelines. So the only people who are really enthused about protecting the right of eminent domain, the supposed right of eminent domain, are the people who have financial investment in these pipelines and are going to profit from it. And, you know, more power to you, but I don't think that you can go against the Constitution and go against our Republican Party principles in order to do that. There's a right way of doing things and there's a wrong way. And so to me, eminent domain should be taken off the table. And I'm going to do what I can on the Senate side to see that that happens. To be honest, it's going to be an uphill battle. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to get that bill passed. So I've got some backup measures and other bills to try to at least do what I can. But I'm going to press for doing ultimately the right thing, which is removing this temptation altogether from the Utilities Board.
Wow. I get to follow that? That's unfair. You know, the ethanol industry has been a big positive for our farming community. It has done a tremendous amount to help stabilize and increase grain prices. So, as somebody who has been a supporter of the ethanol industry for a long time, I feel, honestly, personally, it's just very bad that we're kind of in this rock and hard place, because the story we're being sold is that, and it may or may not be true, that it's going to be difficult to market the product outside of the state of Iowa, California being one, but there are other markets outside of Iowa, even our own federal government, because in talking with some of the ethanol plant managers, jet fuel could be created from ethanol, but we're not going to be able to sell it to our own federal government because of the ESG and green standards that have to be met. But ultimately, in my mind, if it was my land and I didn't want somebody to come through it, I don't think they have a right to come through it. I don't think it fits as a public use. I don't think it fits as a public utility. So I boil it back down to if you want to go and build the pipeline and people want to participate voluntarily, more power to it. I'm not going to stand in the way of private business, but I don't think an eminent domain applies in this instance. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. As detailed, I think, you know, the lobbying effort, and that's my first section, is about lobbying efforts and how the political process, they've done well about positioning themselves in the Iowa Utility Board and getting it through, getting their committee recommendation to an actual vote. So following up with that, we've witnessed Governor Reynolds using money in politics to influence lawmakers. For example, Governor endorsed 2 House candidates after the school voucher vote when some Republican congressmen did not support her position on school vouchers and the bill did not pass. One of those candidates Governor Reynolds endorsed was Mr. Zach Deakin. Congressman-elect Deakin, can you assure taxpayers that political power will not influence your decisions to represent the taxpayers and voters in your district?
Yeah, 100%. And so I think that I was endorsed based on the education thing alone. I'm brand new to all of this, and so I think it surprised everybody, especially me, that endorsement happened. So I'll just say that. But yeah, we agree on education, but we disagree on the pipeline. We disagree on, in my opinion, the life issue. We disagree on restricting her governing powers in an emergency situation. I said at an event that was for her and myself that we need to restrict governing emergency powers. And so she was there, I still said it. I'm a man of principle, I'm a man of conviction, and I stand by that. So I'm grateful for anybody that endorsed us and supported us in the campaign, but I guess if I may, just take the time to thank the people that are here, because there's a lot more people here that supported me than 2 weeks of the governor. I mean, by the time she endorsed me, the race was over. And so, like, I'm not saying it didn't help, and I wasn't grateful for it, but listen, guys, I won because of grassroots support, and y'all that voted for me in here. And even if you didn't vote for me in here, I'm so thankful that you're here, and you're engaging in this process. But no, I stand by my principle. We can agree on education, but we disagree on a lot more than we agree on, it seems. So, yeah.
So along that line, maybe we could ask the other representatives here where they, should the school voucher measure pass the House this next session, where do you stand? And do you see reconciliation options in the House? Maybe you could, maybe the rest of you, we know where Zach stands, so if you could address that, please. Oh, maybe Lynn should go first this time.
You go first. I don't know about him anymore. As a long-time educator, my stance on this is, even when I was in the position of the school administrator, I was mostly concerned about a child's education, and we work with homeschool families in every district that I've been in. I've worked with private schools very closely as well. So I'm not opposed necessarily to the vouchers themselves, but it's going to affect about 2% of the total student population in the state of Ohio, as it was presented last year. I don't know what any bills are going to look like this year. I haven't seen it. So my concern still remains with the other 98%. We want to have the best education that we can offer for every child in the state, and it has to be the best education we can offer for every child in the state. So am I in support of the ESA bill? I would be, as long as we're not forgetting completely about the other 98% and those parents who will continue to make that choice for public education as being the best option for their child. I think there's a feeling out there, and this is just from me being around, no one's told it to me directly yet, but that there is a pulling back away from support for public education. And both my kids graduated from HMS, had a great experience there. Even if we would have an option to go to a private school, I would have still sent them to the public school. That would have been my choice. And I would hope that the resources would be there so they could offer what my child would need. Now, I have some ideas on some things that we could do, not only support homeschool parents, private school parents, but also public school education parents that I'll be putting forward when I get down there. Fortunately, I am on the education committee, so they're going to hear those from me. And if you want to hear more about it later, we can talk.
Well, as somebody who went to public schools, kindergarten through 12th grade at Spencer, I grew up not far from here, I am somebody who, although I support school choice, when I go to I guess the past 2 years, I've gone to a gathering of school choice advocates, and many of which are Christian school advocates. And in Sioux County especially, we are really blessed. This area in general, we're blessed with a lot of good Christian schools, which not every, especially rural county in the state, is able to claim that. But I tell them, when I speak to them, although I'm a supporter of school choice, I don't believe that it should be done on the backs of the public schools. I don't think we have to pit the one against the other. And I'm not somebody who is ever going to demonize public education. I have conservative and libertarian friends who will sneer at what they call government schools, and you should take your kids out of them, they're destroying them. And at least in the state of Iowa, and at least in Northwest Iowa, I'm not seeing that happen. I think, generally speaking, we have very good public schools, we have very dedicated public school teachers, administrators. They exercise common sense. They haven't gone off on every crazy tangent that is popular in some educational circles nowadays. And so I don't see that group as as somebody that is an adversary or somebody that I have any ill will towards. So I'm going to, as a member of the Education Committee, but also on the Appropriations Subcommittee that will fund public education, my plan is to have appropriate level of funding and for the public schools to make sure that not only that they stay as good as they are, but they actually improve, but at the same time we do offer greater diversity, greater freedom for parents and students who want something different. And not every school is equally great in our state. In some communities, I think maybe it's more important than in others that we incentivize the ability of parents to send their kids to non-public schools if that's the decision that they made. So I think we can do both. I don't think we have to choose one over the other. So I voted the past 2 sessions for the governor's ESA bills. I anticipate I'm going to be a supporter of the next ESA proposal as well. It'll probably be a little bit broader, I'm thinking, than the past 2 versions that were brought forward by the governor. And I anticipate that I'm going to be supportive of that. I also am somebody who thinks that I'm conservative enough that if we're going to make a change, we don't have to go a whole hog in making that change and say, well, you know, we're going to include every school and every parent in the whole state in the first year. I think, you know, we want to try it out, try it for a year or 2 or 3, and if it has unintended consequences, and some of those could be negative, then we can recalibrate and tweak that. So I think we can take a measured approach, but at the same time a little bit broader, rather than just targeting a few what's called failing school districts, which was the proposal back in 2021. I'd like to see a little bit broader approach so that more parents in the state of Iowa can benefit from this.
Well, I think you all said basically what I was going to say. So in full disclosure, I send my kids to private school, and we'll do that for all 5 of them. But, well, first of all, I think Lynn said it best, a rising tide rises all ships, right? So we need to be a community in this effort. I think that it's unfair to pit the private schools against the public schools, and because I think we're all in this together. An educated society is what we need. But at the same time, we also have a constitutional right to a private or to a public education. And so we need to make sure that our public schools are well funded, especially when we are seeing historic inflation. Their costs are only increasing. Not to mention, it is very, very difficult to find a substitute teacher, to find a bus driver, and they're having to pay those people a lot more. And those people deserve a good wage, because that's certainly a job that not everybody can do, and that not everybody wants to do. So we need to be respectful of our public schools and funding them to the level that they need. But at the same time, we also have to realize that there are situations where we need to rely on the private sector, right? So it was a few years ago, a couple of family members of students sat down with me, and we had a really difficult conversation about some problems that their kids were facing when it came to dyslexia. And I learned a lot in that meeting. I learned that 1 in 5 students has some kind of dyslexia, and there's 8 different kinds of dyslexia. And we are just now starting to roll out endorsements for teachers when it comes to dyslexia so they can catch it earlier. Because I think in years past, we just sent those kids on, right? And they couldn't read. And again, we have a constitutional right and obligation to an education, and if you can't read, it's really difficult to have an education. And so I started talking with these folks, and what we decided was to introduce a bill that would pay for private tutoring services for these kids. It was an online program. There's several of them that these kids can do on their iPads or their computers during study hall or after school, before school, that can help retrain their brain to get past that dyslexia. And so was it public money going to a private institution? You betcha. But at the same time, our teachers and our schools are overworked, and adding dyslexia onto their plate is probably something that they can't tackle right now. And so, you know, that bill was kind of a perfect storm of opportunity when it came to this discussion, because we were kind of outsourcing this situation to the private sector who had tackled it and who knew how to handle it. And those kids deserve to be able to read when they graduate. And so, I guess the answer to the question originally is that I want to read the bill because I want to make sure that we're protecting our public schools, but at the same time I want to make sure that we are helping those kids who need a different educational opportunity than the traditional brick and mortar classroom that we're seeing. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to still continue on with some of the political process and maybe some lobbying efforts, but it's going to focus more on the Iowa Natural Resources. You will also hear lobbyists about Iowa Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund Amendment 1, 2010. This amendment was adopted, adopted the Iowa's Water and Land Legacy Amendment and created a dedicated trust fund, the IWIL. This amendment to the Constitution over 12 years ago provides that the next sales tax increase will allow 3/8 of every cent, estimated to be about 150 to 200 million. Since there has been no state sales tax increase, IWIL has remained unfunded, but lobby pressure is mounting for this increase in the sales tax. Further, there's strong lobby pressure from Governor Reynolds. The governor has pushed for an increase in the state sales tax called Invest in Iowa, which is a really good name, in 2020. And she has a plan to take it up again in 2021 and 2022. It sounds great, Invest in Iowa. However, especially in the case of IWIL, the funding allocations are set at 23% to state parks, forest and preserves, 20% to conservation and water protection, 14% to preserve watersheds, 13% for natural and cultural recreational trails, 13% to local communities for outdoor recreation, 10% to trails, 7% for lake restoration. How will you react to this sales tax increase, which is encouraged by Governor Reynolds, and the consequence of funding IWIL? And what will be your responses to lobbyists? Go. Yeah.
So when it comes to the lobby, I'm not afraid to tell those vultures to go pound sand. There's a lobbyist on every issue, for every association, for every society, and they're all going to tell you different things. Senator Taylor, you probably agree with me, but you walk out to the rotunda and it's like vultures, right? I listen to people, but I know that the people I really need to be listening to are the folks back home. Now, I'm all about hearing different sides of stories, and I want to be educated on the issues, so I'm going to listen to them. I'm going to hear their story, hear what they have to say, but when it comes to voting, I was elected by the people back home, so I try to gather all the information I can and make the best call that I can. So when it comes to the sales tax, the governor proposes in her condition of the state address in 2020, and then just a few weeks later, COVID hit, and I think that just kind of derailed the whole thing. And if I remember correctly, her proposal was budget neutral. And so that's a really interesting way of doing it, because it would have raised the state sales tax, but it would have cut your taxes elsewhere. So it would have triggered this fund, and it would have bumped up the sales tax, but then you would have seen income tax cut or a property tax cut. And I can't remember which one off the top of my head right now. I think that's going to be the way it would have to be, because right now, quite frankly, we don't need to be raising taxes, and we don't need more tax revenue in Des Moines. Quite frankly, we could probably do better with less of it. So, but I think you'll see some efforts to cut taxes this next legislative session too. So, I'm open to it if it means it's going to be budget neutral. But I think you bring up a really good point about the formula, because that formula was developed 12 years ago. And a lot has changed since then. We are now celebrating the 10th anniversary of the nutrient reduction strategy, and I think that's a really important piece to that puzzle and something that we need to continue on, particularly when it comes to voluntary water quality measures by our farming community. And there's a lot of pieces in there that are currently in code that make people very nervous, and I understand that, especially when it comes to land acquisition. So we're going to have some, if we're going to have a discussion about raising the sales tax, it's going to have to be budget control, but then also we're going to have to adjust that formula.
So I'm obviously brand new, and so I'm learning a lot, and this is one thing that I'm continuing to learn more about. I'm concerned about raising taxes for something like this. It just gives me a gut feeling that, I don't know, I hope it's a healthy distrust in government. You know, perhaps sometimes it's an unhealthy one, but hopefully I have a healthy distrust in government. But anyway, I think there's a lot of things that the Department of Natural Resources wants to do or has been doing that needs more oversight. And so I would like to introduce legislation to put more oversight over them to make sure that they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing before we just give them more money to do stuff that maybe they shouldn't be doing in the first place. And so I hope that I don't want to piggyback off of what Ms. Megan said or even punt, but my gut feeling is not really wanting to raise taxes for something like this. And until I really figure out what exactly they're going to be doing with the money. Because I have talked to constituents that are really worried about what the DNR actually is doing with the resources that they're being given. And in my opinion, there needs to be some oversight with the DNR.
So for me, I'm less concerned about what the lobby wants me to do on this particular idea of a sales tax increase triggering increased funding, or actual funding in the first place for Iowa or the Trust Fund for Natural Resources. I'm less concerned about the lobby than I am with the fact that Iowa voters, this was an example within our Republican system of government of direct democracy, where the Iowa voters voted for this constitutional amendment, right? And it was an overwhelming 64%, right? So it was like 2-to-1 margin, roughly, right? And public opinion polls in recent years have shown that funding this trust fund, or IWIL, remains popular with most Iowans. So to me, that catches my attention more than what this group or that group wants me to do. I think there is a way, and I'll say this too, with a group in a rural area of my district, or former district here, it probably would be popular for me to say, no, I'm completely against IWIL, and I will work to prevent that trigger from taking place. But I do want to say that this past session, I was supportive of Senator Dan Dawson, who was chair of the Ways and Means Committee, which I sat on. He supported that triggering of the sales tax as a way of allowing local governments to still raise adequate revenue in the face of the tax reform bills that we passed, which lowered property taxes at the local level, right? So it was going to be revenue neutral. It wasn't the taxes were going to go up, but this was another way for them to maintain adequate services at the local level. And to me, I saw it as an advantage that IWIL would be funded. However, at the same time, when it was brought to my attention, actually through this group, the problem of DNR and private groups buying up so much farmland and outbidding local farmers for that farmland, and then taking it out, not necessarily out of production, but out of use as pasture or timber or whatever it might be. Then in Orion County especially, but throughout the state, this is an ongoing problem, right? So I also, at the same time last year, supported a bill that would have made it much more difficult for DNR to do that. And that, unfortunately, that bill stalled out, it didn't pass. but I'm still in support of that approach. So I think we could actually do both. And I think it's even more important to do that if I-Will does get funded. Because I think we do have the power, it's not written into the Constitution, we have the power as a legislature to revisit those formulas. It was already proposed this past session, the original numbers that DNR wanted, we weren't prepared to allow that. I think we can not only revisit the formulas, but we can put a moratorium on new land acquisitions by DNR, and I would be supportive of that. Let DNR take care of the land they already have,
Yes.
right? And I feel the same way with the county conservation board. We go out frequently. My son David is here. We go out usually every Sunday as a family with our dog, who's big and energetic, and we get some exercise at state and county parks here in Northwest Iowa. And some of them are great, but others are not so great. You know, it may be summer, and it's like no trails are mowed. There's no signage. You can't even tell from the road that there's a park. It's like, so that land is just sitting there. Now maybe somebody's making use of it, maybe hunters or somebody. But people who are out, you know, wanting to get some exercise and having some recreation, we're clueless if we have some kind of map. I found that identifies within each county where these things are located, right? But they're almost like hidden. And so I think, well, what are the counties and what is the state doing to publicize, to mow, to maintain, to educate for people who want to use the existing land? I don't see that they need more at this point. I think they need to make better use of what we already have. So to me, I'm not hostile to the idea of I-Will, but I think we need to put limits on what DNR can do if they do get that additional money.
Yeah, I agree their funds should be spent on improving the land they already have and making it more accessible for recreational activities. We have a lot of people that actually leave, especially Northwest Iowa, leave the state, go to South Dakota and play out in their nice, well-improved areas. We don't stay home. We have wonderful areas too. They would just put their resources in improving those rather than going out and just buying another land and taking it out from under farmers who are actually using it, trying to earn a living off of it. But there's another piece of this. Okay, the I-Will, that's all on sales tax, right? Whenever you raise sales tax, it's a regressive form of tax. So what that means is that the people who earn the least get hit the hardest, even though you have some choice in how you spend your money and purchasing things. But that additional 3/8 of a cent, or penny, or whatever it is that we has more impact on the low-income people than it does on middle or upper income. So just from that standpoint alone, I'm against raising sales tax. I fully expect to see in this year's property tax reform bill and discussions that raising sales tax is going to probably be a piece of that in the formula. But I'm not a big fan of raising sales tax in any form, just to be honest with you.
One last quick question. I do have a few others, but that will give us another hour for people to take the mic and actually talk to you directly, which it sounds like you want to hear from us, which we appreciate so much, to establish a communication. I hope that you give them your contact information and that they give you theirs as well. One last question. Several states have adopted laws to recognize gold and silver as legal tender. West Virginia has announced a plan to remove taxation on precious metals. What do you think about that?
I'll start. First of all, I don't own any gold. I guess my wedding ring, but beyond that, yeah, I might have gold fillings, but I'm not an expert on precious metals and investments and things like that. But I will say this, that as somebody who over the years has admired the idea of having sound money, hard money, not money created out of thin air by the Federal Reserve, that's not backed by anything. And that's one of the reasons that we have the sky-high inflation that we've seen this past year. I like that idea. I've read a little bit about that, and I like the idea of legalizing it. As traditionally, it's been a form of money much longer than Federal Reserve notes or paper currency have been. And so, you know, this is an age where cryptocurrency, which you know, is in many ways it's just all theoretical, and we're seeing some of the downsides last few weeks on that one. If something like that can be legal, I don't see why precious metals that have inherent value couldn't be legal as well.
Anybody else?
I don't even have an intelligent response. That's good. Now I gotta go do some reading. Thank you, Denise. Yeah. And I do hold some precious metals, so not a lot. So, yeah. So no, it is an interesting concept.
You should read on it. There's about one.
I would like to expand on the question, because by making gold and silver legal tender, the federal government cannot touch it. The federal government cannot come in and call it back, like we know our federal government has done and could do again. So this is a bigger question than what we've heard you guys respond to so far. So I'm going to pin it a little bit more. Would you support or even introduce legislation on this? I'm giving you more time to study it, of course. But I think this thing is huge because it makes it legal, and the federal government can't touch it. So please expand.
I'm just going to say one PS based on what you said, Chuck, that you know, the Federal Reserve System was created back in 1913, and prior to that we had no national bank since the days of, well, Andrew Jackson killed it off, the second national bank, which you know, one of the good things that Andrew Jackson did. We don't need centralized control of our money supply in the United States. That's one of the problems among many with the Federal Reserve System. So I like that idea of saying that, you know, again, as with so many things in our society, you know, marriage, what is a man, what is a woman? Now government presumes to, and it's not government in general, but government in Washington specifically, presumes that they are going to decide for all of us in every 50, you know, all 50 states of what these things are, things that predated by thousands of years the creation of the federal government in Washington. So it's the same thing with money. I don't see any reason why they should have a monopoly on it, and I think that kind of concentration of power in public or private hands is dangerous. So I would see that as something of course I'd have to read the specifics of it, but at least in principle something I can support.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And to piggyback off of it, I think that we have unfortunately gotten to the point where our government has gotten so big and so bad that we need to start attacking this from any direction possible. And so I would be supportive of that because it only adds to the sovereignty of our own state, right? And I mean, the colonies did it when we were not the United States of America, right? Each colony had their own tender. I mean, some of them shared, but I mean, there's a lot of them where it was separate. And so it only adds to the sovereignty of the state of Iowa or the sovereignty of the state of, what was one of the states? West Virginia.
Missouri, Idaho.
And so we have to stop treating this like it's a conspiracy theory. This is the way our government is acting. And so as a state, we have to be a state and a sovereign state at that and push back. And so I would be for it. And obviously I'm willing to learn. And so please throw anything you got at me because I mean, you know me, Chuck, at least hopefully some. Yeah. So anyway.
Well, I'm glad our professor here took this question first because I was going to ask you what your thoughts were because then I tried to pull the Constitution on my phone because I wanted to go back to the Constitution because I wanted to read what that had to say about United States currency. And I don't have service in this building, but
None of us do.
So I think it's really interesting, and I don't know what I want to see what the exact wording is because my initial fear, and I'll explain this a little bit, was why I want to make sure that it's real, right? And so, so I had a constituent contact me about a year and a half ago because a local business had accepted a $100 bill and sold, you know, a little of stuff, gave them cash back, and they all went on with their lives. Well, then to find out when they went to go make the deposit, the cash, the bill, was actually motion picture money. And Google this, you know what I'm talking about? Okay, so we had a bill in the House to fix this because you've probably seen this in your business. Motion picture money is exactly what it is. It's money that's used in movies, right? Or music videos. You know, when you see a trunk full of cash, it's fake. But it looks like real money. But there are some ways to tell the difference. But if you're a 16-year-old cashier and, you know, it's your first job, you probably don't know what to look for. And so like in the top where it says United States of America, they'll put in the exact same font, the exact same location, and the exact same size for motion picture use only. Or, you know, it looks just like money. And I will tell you, you can get it on Amazon, go to Amazon, try to go, just type in motion picture money, and you'll have hundreds of results. I went and bought some for $7. I bought some on Amazon, and I got a stack. of it. So we were kind of jokingly just passing it around. And I had a couple laying on my desk, and one disappeared. I faked another one fell off my desk. But in any case, we just need to make sure that that we have measures in place to make sure that people aren't getting screwed over.
Thank you. Kind of piggybacking that is a question we have from someone here, and it's like, what has our state government done, and what more can be done to combat overreaches by the Biden administration? Which part of this is, you know, encroaching on state rights in many ways. So, a question.
I don't have a huge Facebook following, which is fine. I hate Facebook, but I try to post the things that I'm for or interested in. And so recently I posted, I believe it's called the Sheriff's First Act, and I was asked to co-sign that. And after reading it, we're still tweaking some verbiage that I have a little bit of an issue with, but I co-signed on that. So it's right along the lines of sovereign, you know, state sovereignty, which I'm absolutely for, even from a, you know, citizen first, trooper second. And so from even a law enforcement perspective, it excited me because of how the FBI and the IRS have been weaponized against us as citizens. So essentially, in a nutshell, it would require, and I'll say this first before I explain the act, it holds us accountable to be involved locally. Who's your sheriff? Who's your county board of supervisors? Those elections matter. We need to know who those people are. And so the Sheriff First Act, which I support, would force any federal agent or anybody acting on behalf of the federal government to notify the sheriff of any searches, seizures, and arrests being made in his county. And so, again, there's just some nuances that I wanted to see tweaked because they didn't really make sense to me from a law enforcement perspective. But I feel like that is going to be a good way to push back against the federal government. They can't just come into our state and run amok like they have done in other places. So hopefully that'll be a good measure we can take.
I guess one of the things that drew my attention with the table back there is a reprint, magazine reprint, talking about nullification. And nullification is an idea that Thomas Jefferson and James Madison came up with back in 1798, and they were trying to stop. Ironically, they were both federal officials at the time. Jefferson was vice president of the country at the time, but President Adams was overreaching with unconstitutional laws, specifically the Alien and Sedition Acts that he created. And they argued that the state legislatures are the ultimate interpreter and enforcer of the U.S. Constitution. And if the U.S. Constitution is being violated by the federal government, Can you count on the U.S. Supreme Court or federal judges that belong to that federal government? Can you count on them to do the right thing and rein themselves in? I think oftentimes, more often than not, we've seen the answer is no to that. And so they were arguing that state legislatures could disregard within their borders federal laws that were unconstitutional. And I think that is exactly right. I mean, you've got the primary author of the Declaration of Independence, one of the main framers of the U.S. Constitution, Jefferson and Madison. You don't get better authorities than that. So this isn't some radical or recent idea. And what's more, sometimes people will say, well, the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution says that if a state law conflicts with the federal law takes priority. It's supreme. But there's an extra line in that. That's Article 6 of the Constitution. It says federal law is made in accordance with the U.S. Constitution, right? So it has to be a constitutional law in order for the federal government to be supreme when there is a clash. And so I feel like the states, over the years, way too often, we have given up that sovereignty, that independence, and really, frankly, the upholding of the 10th Amendment, which says that anything that isn't spelled out in the U.S. Constitution is being given to Congress, and the federal government is reserved to the people or to the states. And as state government officials ourselves, and as representatives of the people of Iowa, I think we need to uphold the 10th Amendment and say, no, we're not going to violate our oath that we take to the U.S. Constitution and the state constitution by enforcing federal laws when they are overreached and when they actually represent a repudiation of the Constitution, which is the most fundamental law of the land. So I'm in favor of us standing up for our rights and standing up for the rights of the people.
Very good. I too have agreed to sign off on that first act, pending the final draft coming through. But a great idea that you have to go through the sheriff, local county sheriff, if you're an outside agency. I mean, just common sense. And there's a number of laws on the books that we follow that are federal laws that are not constitutional. So we not only have the ability, I think we have the responsibility to push back on some of those. And one of them, it's kind of a hot topic right now, is the recent Marriage Act. The Respect for Marriage Act. There's nothing in the Constitution that gives the federal government the authority to dictate marriage. So that it's assumed that it comes back to the states or the individuals. So that's one example. Another example, I've been on this for a lot. Some people probably heard me say this over a long period of time. But the Federal Department of Education is unconstitutional. There's nothing in the Constitution that gives the federal government the power to regulate education. So that's why they always hold the carrot. When they have their little ranks come down to the state, you do this, we're going to give you money for it. So they don't look like a fool when you turn down money. But I think in some cases we need to start pushing back hard and send a message to the federal government that no, it's not constitutional, and it's up to us as a state or our individuals to make those decisions.
Another question from those gathered here is, what can our state do to protect our state borders from illegal immigration?
Okay, so if I may, there's a couple of ideas, schools of thought, I suppose, that have kind of come across my desk. One, our good friend Randy Veenstra, I think, has made it clear in Congress that he's just going to say no to earmarks. And he just says no thank you. And I know some folks have kind of taken the task over that because, well, why wouldn't you want to bring money into your district? And I think he's really starting this trend in Congress of saying, that's my money. That is my money. That is my tax money. So when the federal government comes in and says, we'll help you build this rest area, but you have to spend 10% of the project on public art, and we're only going to give you $2 million. Okay, $2 million is a lot of money, right? It is. But that's my money, and that's my kids' money. That's my grandkids' money. So, I think we need our members of Congress to start standing up and saying enough is enough, and we're not going to do these, kind of pay to play business deals, because that's our money. That is our money. And we need to be judicious about how we spend it, whether it's in our district or not. And, but then the other thing that way we can keep the Biden administration to task, I'm really excited about our new Attorney General, and I look forward to the lawsuits that she will be participating in the coming years. I'm really excited for Brenna. I think it's nice to have a change of administration, and she's got a lot of really good, fresh ideas. And so I think supporting her efforts is really something that we as a state legislature can do to ward off the federal government. And your next question was about immigration. So we need to be working with our federal members of Congress to make it easier to become a citizen. And I don't mean amnesty, but it shouldn't take 10 years to become a legal citizen of the United States. We have a severe shortage of people here, and I think communities like Storm Lake have really benefited from immigration and the culture, the diversity, the community, and I think we are doing ourselves a disservice when we shut the door. And so I think we need to find those routes and help people who want to live here and want to live here legally. I think we need to help them become citizens through those legal channels. But when it takes 10 years, I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine having your life on hold for 10 years? I think there are ways that our federal government needs to become more efficient. And quite frankly, this is more than about immigration, but the Department of Revenue, holy cow! The Internal Revenue Service, I belong in a nonprofit, and we've been waiting since like April to get our federal designation. I mean, the federal government's just glacial in their pace, and they need to pick it up and start getting to work.
Well, with legal immigration, it sounds like a cop-out to say it's a complex issue, because usually what people say, they'll say it's a complex issue because they don't want to give a straight answer, and that's not my intention here. But it is a complex issue, and it's primarily a federal government issue. They are tasked with immigration policy. They've been tasked with protecting the borders of our country, and they've failed miserably when it comes to the southern border of Mexico. And I see the fact that the border, even during the Trump years, it was improvement, but for the most part, for decades, it's been almost virtually wide open. And the reason, to be honest, and it's Republicans and Democrats in Washington, the reason they won't close the border is because the business lobby likes cheap labor, and they want to import cheap workers. Now, from a business point of view, purely from profit, keeping overhead low, I can understand that. And, I come from Sioux County, and there are a lot of big employers, ag employers, who have a lot of illegal immigrants working for them. They don't want to see the border closed either, right? The service industry, people who clean hotel rooms, motel rooms, people who work in fast food restaurants, construction workers, all kinds of different areas of the economy. They like employing people who, first of all, won't unionize, and second of all, will work for wages that Americans are either unwilling or unable to work for. And that's the reason we have an open border. I don't like that. I think it's, this isn't out of the goodness of the hearts of the business lobby. It benefits them. And I don't blame them for that. But I don't think it's been good for our country overall. And it's an exploitation of the workers who are imported in our country to work for those substandard wages, by the way. So I see it as a justice issue partly for them, but it also hurts, especially low-skilled people who lack college degrees who are Americans. It hurts them, their ability to compete when we suppress wages decade after decade. So I see it as a problem, but I think it's primarily the solution is at the federal level. One thing that I am introducing is a bill that I've been working on. Other people have sponsored it for the last 2 years. I've supported it. But this year I'm sponsoring a bill which would add labor broker to the legal definition of general contractor. So in other words, when houses and buildings are built in the state of Iowa, oftentimes the people who are building those are illegal immigrants. and they are brought into our country by, we call them coyotes or human smugglers, and oftentimes they'll bring them to the state, they'll put them on the job, and then they will either stiff them entirely and not even pay them. Many of them don't even speak English, and they may not even know where they're at, what state. Sometimes they're told they're in Ohio and they're in Iowa. They'll either stiff them or underpay them what they promised them. So this bill would, at the very least, try to address that by saying that if you're going to be a general contractor in Iowa, that includes labor workers, and you have to list the name and address of all of the different people who are working on the job site for you. Now, to be honest, the business lobby killed that bill the last 2 years because they like the status quo. In fact, they claim it doesn't even exist. The problem, oh no, I've never heard of that, they say. Well, of course they've heard of it, and they benefit from it. But to me, this not only exploits the workers that are brought from south of the border, but it also hurts Iowa workers who would work for an honest wage and also ethical builders who don't want to rely on people coming across the border breaking the law. So we'll see if we can make some progress on that. But that's one little aspect of a bigger problem that is primarily federal in scope.
Great, thanks. E-Verify is one thing that we should be really pushing, that we're verifying when you hire someone that they're a legal citizen of the country. I think that should be across the board. The other thing, and you heard me say this here a few months ago, we have laws on the books, and we're choosing to not enforce them. How about we just enforce the laws we already have? That would make sense to me on a federal level and on a state level. I agree with Representative Jones that we probably need to look at making it easier to become a citizen in the United States for those who truly want to be a citizen in this country. I don't have a problem with that. Where I do have a problem is, obviously we have a number of people who have come here illegally, which by definition they broke the law. So when we turn our heads and just say, oh well, it's too big a problem to wrap our arms around. Sorry, all you did was excuse someone for breaking the law. And that's wrong, in my opinion. So we need to enforce the laws we have, and we need to find easier ways for people to become citizens so they can come here legally, and they're not maybe quite as tempted to just sneak across the borders. E-Verify, the question is state at what level. And I think in Iowa, we should be using E-Verify when we hire anybody.
One of the problems with what you're saying here, I have a friend.
1 minute.
Who was that?
Get a mic.
I have a friend who was a contractor who had 5 guys working for him. He's out of business today because he cannot compete with what you're talking about. So it's hurting people right here in America.
I have a problem with thinking that Storm Lake has benefited from illegals. I was born in Storm Lake. I lived in Buena Vista County for the first 16 years of my life. Storm Lake was the big town we went to shop. I worked in Storm Lake for 20 years and watched it go downhill. I got a niece that lives in the Storm Lake School District. She said her property taxes are terrible. They're building new schools to accommodate many people that don't even speak English. So I would strongly argue that Storm Lake is improved because of illegal immigration.
So if I could just clarify what I said, I think I said Storm Lake has benefited from immigration, not illegal immigration. So I go to church in Storm Lake. I'm in Storm Lake all the time. It's an amazing community, and they have embraced a lot of the challenges that they have faced. A lot of their school buildings, I think, are being built with the save penny, and that's attributable to economic development. So I'm in contact with Dr. Cole. We talk about the challenges that they face, and certainly they face a lot of different challenges than a lot of other communities in Iowa. But I think every school district kind of has different challenges. Ultimately.
When I was in 1960, the census said they have about the same number of people in Buena Vista County that they do in 2020. In 1960, we had 2 sheriffs covered the whole county, sheriff and deputy. Now there's 16 deputies, plus the sheriff, for the same number of people. So don't tell me Buena Vista County has gotten better in the 60-some years. That's 1960.
So, yeah, a couple of things. One, I think we need to do a better job of encouraging our young people to stay here, right? Because obviously, we've had new people replace the people that have left. And our young folks, they get a good education in Iowa, and then they leave. And we need to do a better job of keeping them here. When it comes to law enforcement, and Representative Deacon can probably tell you a little bit about this, but we have put a lot more on our sheriffs and deputies when it comes to civil service and those kinds of tasks. So it's not just about crime that they're going after, but then also we are at, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we're at some pretty low numbers when it comes to state patrol. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but between the hours of like midnight and 6 a.m., there's what, 4 troopers in the whole state. And so that puts a lot of pressure on our county law enforcement. They beef up their numbers because there's not a trooper available, and that's on us as a state to have more troopers available.
Okay.
May I just real quick, I won't take too much time, so I didn't want to just pass the microphone off and be silent on the question. I just wanted time to think about it. So there's a representative down there now, Mr. Thompson, who is going to be pushing for higher penalties for trafficking. Trafficking is sex trafficking, labor trafficking is a big deal in Iowa. We might not think about it, but it is a big deal. I think the best advice I received as far as this political process is be honest and just stand by what you say. So my honest answer is, I don't know what a direct answer to the problem as far as a state would go. I think that we need to actually punish those who continue to break our laws. We need to perhaps beef up penalties for the labor mules, the drug mules. From a law enforcement perspective, we don't punish people for doing anything anymore. And that includes illegal immigration. And so from a state perspective, since I'm a state representative, it is difficult because I look at how horrible my federal government is and the job that they've done and the mess that it has created for all of us to now pick up. And so if it's cutting off incentives or if it is just as simple as punishment fits the crime, I do sincerely, genuinely feel horrible for these individuals who are being trafficked and being taken advantage of. And so the people that are taking advantage of them for profit ought to be punished and booted. And so that doesn't necessarily take care of the whole gamut. I get it. And, rebuttal me as you will. That's fine. I don't have a great answer for you. But from a state perspective, we can enforce laws that we have, and we can beef up laws that hold law enforcement accountable to enforce the laws, and even county attorneys to actually dish out the punishment that fits the crime for a lot of this. So I just didn't want to be silent on it.
Thank you. So we have about 30 minutes. I know they want to hear from you. If you have anything you want to say, we do have the right to cut you off. We will exercise that right. But if anyone has anything they would like to ask, they would like to say, this is your chance. Rick Rock here.
Mr. Evans, you was talking about enforcing laws we have on the books. Go back to eminent domain. The laws are on the books. They can't use it for a private gain. Enforce the law. Make it simple.
Correct. That's why I was taking that issue back to the eminent domain issue. because I don't think this project fits in the description of use of eminent domain.
So we don't need new laws, just enforce the ones.
Enforce the ones we have.
And make them usable.
Yeah, I would, to just go a little further on that, I anticipate, I haven't heard anything yet, maybe Senator Taylor knows more, I'm sure he knows more than I do on just about everything, but we're going to have probably some deep discussions on what is public use and what is a utility. I guarantee that there's going to be some pretty high level discussion on those two issues right there. But I agree with you, it's already there.
Bruce Rathsetter's name came up. He's one of these big pushers of this. This pipeline is for private property. I've talked to these land agents. They say, I tell them I want a yearly check where this pipeline goes to. We can't do it. I don't think it's their say that they can't do it. We own the land. Private property rights are first. If we demand a yearly payment, and I understand some of the higher ups in this government are bought out already, which is a fact. We do need government to back us up. We still pay the taxes in this state. We need the government to back us, not private people. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Rick. Can I just follow up real quick with part of my problem with it isn't just the fact that the Utilities Board may, and at least in the case of the Summit pipeline, I'm assuming will grant them eminent domain at some point, unless they're told that they can't. It isn't just a future threat, but it's an existing pressure that is being used on all the farmers who are asked to be signing a voluntary easement. Now, if you want the money and you're not worried about crop yield on the topsoil disturbance, all the possible downsides of having a pipeline laid through your property, if you're enthused about that, as Senator Evans said, more power to you. I'm not against that. I'm not trying to stop you from making that decision, but for the people who are being told, well, here's the price we're offering, and if you don't take it at this price, we're going to get it anyway, because eventually we're going to get eminent domain. If you're one of the holdouts, we're going to get your land through eminent domain, and you're probably going to get a lot less than you're being offered right now. Well, how is that a voluntary easement? That is signing a contract under duress. That's having a gun pointed to your head, saying we're going to get it anyway, one way or another. So sign on the dotted line right now. That's not fair. That's wrong. And so the companies can come to the utilities board and say, oh, we've got 70% voluntary easement. All we need is just the 30% remainder. Well, it doesn't sound like so much at that point. It means a lot to the 30% who are going to have their land taken from them unjustly. But to me, even that 70%, what were the circumstances under which most of those people signed? Had they just given up at a certain point? Had they been badgered, harassed? Had they resigned themselves to the idea, well, the game's rigged anyway, so we're gonna lose this. We may as well take what we get now. I mean, that's not voluntary easement, and that's not right.
Who's to say if it goes to eminent domain, you won't get more money if you have the proper people on the board on that? But is it a jury, 4 or 5 people on this? Who's to say they won't offer these farmers more money? That's what the pipeline's saying, you're not going to get as much. You might get more money through eminent domain.
It's possible. It's possible. I'm not an expert on this part of it. I'm thinking that it's actually done more at the county level, I think. Right, versus the state. So it's the utilities board, they grant the eminent domain, but then it goes to each county to decide.
But it's not a blanket deal.
Right, so it could be, right, they don't know. But the fact is, land agents who are working for these companies, they can say anything they want. They can make any promises they want, they're not under oath. Nothing's going to happen if they're incorrect or if they're lying. Nothing's going to happen. So, take all of that with a big grain of salt is my advice.
I don't mean to change subjects from that, but something we touched on earlier with the DNR, and most, if on it that you don't want them to have any more land acquisition, property acquisition, and so on. You know, Bryan County just recently is, their agricultural ground is the highest priced ground in the state now. And it's competition with livestock guys and finishers. You touched on that. And you said possibly trying to put a moratorium on future purchasing of property. What are your thoughts on a county, individual county, putting a moratorium on any future DNR purchase of ground? I don't know, it's just something I think about. Very good.
Monona County is seeing, I've done a little research on this, not a lot, a little bit. Monona County is seeing similar impact of what we're seeing in the Bryan County, for the same reason.
Part of my father make DNR pay taxes, it's county, and that would start making them think how much we need.
To say that we should have a moratorium on any purchases of DNR land, I think we got to be real careful of that, because I think in some instances, some parts of the state, it might make some sense to open up some more recreational land, public use land. What I don't like is when they look at a piece of ground and they say, okay, this isn't high production ag land, and someone's raising cattle on it. Well, to that person raising cattle on it, that's high production ag land in my opinion. To take it out of production is not good. And I also don't like the fact that a third party, the Heritage Foundation, purchases and holds the land. They have the ability to bid it up higher than what the neighbors can reasonably pay for that ground, and then they hold it, so it's artificially inflated. I've seen some of those purchases over a few years, and so I mean, there's data to support that. Don't like that either. So that's where I said there needs to be more accountability than what there has been, and I also think that if those purchases are to be made, they should go before some governing board for approval prior to purchases being made, in my opinion.
So I don't know what it would look like, but something that I would be interested in introducing is some type of bill that would force the DNR to have government oversight. That they would have to go through the legislature to purchase any land. And it sounds annoying, and maybe I'm saying something that is ignorant, because I've done a little bit of research like Mr. Lynn has, but not probably as much as I should. But at the end of the day, I'm probably okay with forcing the government to jump through more hoops and the citizens to jump through less. And so if the DNR wants some land and they have to go through the legislature to buy it in order to build a horse trail, no offense, I don't own horses and I've actually never ridden one, but the guy who wants the horse trail, in my opinion, can maybe wait a little longer. If it means forcing the DNR to go through the proper means to acquire land that could be used by a private citizen to make money, to feed their family, to whatever, you know. And so I guess I always fall back on the idea of making the government have, forcing them to jump through more hoops and the farmer to jump through less to keep the land private and for private use. That's just my thoughts. So
I think the question was, can that be kicked back to the county to make those decisions? I mean, now you're talking local control. I would much rather have the counties make the decision on those land purchases rather than the state government, because that's who it affects, is the people in that county. So that would make perfect sense to me, if there's some way that we can do that.
And when I said purchase, I meant acquisition.
Acquisition, yes. Yeah.
Because there are other, without directly purchasing it.
Yes, thanks for correcting me, you're right, yes.
And that's what I meant, I didn't say it.
Okay. Amy Salzman?
Hi, thanks for coming. I have a whole long thing, but you answered a lot of it, but I want to just reiterate a little bit more with the eminent domain, that this is a very nonpartisan issue. and it's mostly Republicans here, but I've talked to lots of Democrats within the state legislature as well last year, you know, that were on the committee also. And I think it's just a very nonpartisan, not even bipartisan, because it's all parties are concerned with this. And so just to reiterate that, and that I think that the tide is turning this year. Last year it was kind of dead in the water really too soon. And so just to encourage you to get something done this legislative session, something different, and that hopefully we can stop private companies getting eminent domain.
Denny Wertmeister, good evening. First I'd like to qualify my comments by saying that I worked for a large natural gas pipeline interstate concern for over 20 years in this basic field of acquisition, and my experience tells me that the state of Iowa, the IUB, doesn't have the right of eminent domain if it's in our Constitution. Because if they want to give someone the right of eminent domain, then the Iowa Constitution has to be changed. Now, in my level, we were actually working more with the federal government. And each one of our projects that we did, we had to prove public necessity and need. And then the governing body, which was FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, would give us the golden certificate to go ahead and proceed with that project. If we had to condemn somebody, we had to condemn them. My experience tells me in those 20 years, though, that all the pipeline projects that I was involved in, if we condemned 12 parties, that was about it. When we signed probably thousands of easements. And of course, with your land agents, and that's their integrity. If they have no integrity, they're not going to be a land agent. But take a step back. For me, simple as I think, is on the federal level, all the conditions and so on for public need and necessity are there. Is the Iowa legislature, the IUB, whatever it be, are they trying to come up with new language? When it's just there, they go out there and grab it, bring it back? That'd be my first question. Does anybody know that?
I don't know if I know for sure the answer, but my understanding is that the IUB is basing it not so much on anything in Iowa code, in other words, in Iowa law, and they're not going by the simple sentence in the Iowa Constitution with the takings clause, the eminent domain, referring to public use. They're going beyond that. They're looking at federal and perhaps state judges, the rulings, their interpretation of the Constitution. Even that language that you were saying that the feds use, where they talk about public necessity or public need. There was a U.S. Supreme Court ruling on eminent domain back in 2005, the Kelo ruling, and it was really kind of a bait and switch. Instead of public use, which is what the Constitution says, they use a new expression, public benefit, right? But that's not the same thing. Public use and public benefit are not the same. So you lower the standard, really. You lower the bar when you say, well, this will benefit the people of Iowa, or this is something that the community needs, right? That isn't the same thing as public use. And so I think, rather than letting judges and bureaucrats decide what the Constitution means, let's stick with the actual language of the Constitution, and let's all follow that rule. Now, we may need a new law to make sure that those who are tempted to not follow the Constitution actually do follow the Constitution when they're faced with political pressure like they are right now. But and that's the reason I'm opposing my bills. But you're right. If we stick with what the Constitution actually says, this shouldn't even even be a possibility with these pipelines.
Yeah, agreed. And that's why I'm wondering why we're wasting tax dollars to even on this issue. That it should be a dead issue because in the Constitution says regarding eminent domain, and betterment is not public need necessity, in my opinion.
Well, partly because people's perceptions are different, right? I'm sure there's colleagues of mine in the Senate who are going to argue, oh no, this is public use. I look forward to hearing their explanation because I don't see it, and I'm skeptical that there is a rational explanation as to how you can interpret that language in that way. But we do see things differently, right? And so some of it is that, and some of it is, you know, we know deep down it's wrong, but there's pressures on us, and we do it anyway. Right?
Well, and I would agree with that. There's two sides of the coin. You know, depends on which side of the coin you want to come down on. If you're for these companies, because they are private, have they proved the need necessity? You know, there's a number of issues there. And what I see happening is more of our tax dollars being spent because this will go to the Supreme Court of Iowa. It'll have to be determined somewhere what that language means. So, thank you.
Don't you enjoy hearing from smart people? You know, isn't it great? And likewise, we like hearing from smart people also. Thank you. Anyone else?
Ron Jalis, a little bit on the lighter side, I farm. And I didn't know I could hire illegals and not pay them. I tell you, I think I'll go out and grab about 20 of them. I don't know where it's all But thank you guys for all coming. But I want to make a statement here that my older son and a grandson, and I'm going to mention the entity they worked for. And they were from Sioux County, but Ken Frank and the city people. But they both ended up quitting because, and I'm not sure whether the illegals or they had their green cards, I'm not sure, maybe they were citizens, but there was some kind of government subsidy that if they hired them, those people were getting paid more per hour than what my son was. So he says, nuts to that, I'm leaving. So now they just chased him away. So, okay, so my grandson went to work later on, a few years later, and it was the same thing. So they weren't stiffing these guys, they were actually getting, so I don't know what program is out there, I'm unaware of that. But that, yeah.
Probably some federal program. Our tax dollars.
Okay. Oh, okay, so now I'm going to go to the DNR topic. Right where I'm at, and I've seen you guys at our men's club meeting, you know, on Wednesday mornings. The Nature Conservancy is our worst nightmare. I felt I had a landlady that we had to cut down in cows because she sold it to the Nature Conservancy, and you know where it went. A few years later, the DNR has it. Right to the south of me, it really bothered me because those folks, okay, my landlady was a willing seller, but the story they fed her was bullshit. But then now I got a neighbor that their family just sold 160 acres, 100 acres tillable, and like 50 acres of trees to the Nature Conservancy, and so there's 100 acres taken out of production there. It does bother me, but I don't know what kind of law we can get in the books that if the Californians have so much money to donate, Hollywood Stars thinks we're not going to have any more prairie, and us farmers have ruined the prairie, which is below. Somehow we got to stop that acquisition of like outer entities like the Nature Conservancy. And if we could get them a law on the books to say, hey, you can't turn it over to the DNR, but like you say, or have a board, a local board, saying, hey, you know, maybe that would stop the land acquisition of the Nature Conservancy and turning it over to the DNR. Yes.
Well, my understanding of Nature Conservancy is that was founded back in the 1950s by the Rockefeller family in New York. And they've got deep pockets. I'm sure they've got billions sitting in the bank for Nature Conservancy. So for them to come in and then compete in an auction for local land against local Iowa farmers, or for that matter to have DNR competing in the auction, when it's public funds that they're using to purchase the land, right? It's taxpayer funds.
It's my money they're using.
Yeah, outbidding local taxpayers. That's not right. It's just not right. This was a hot topic this past session, and I think there are going to be reform measures brought forward to try to prevent that from continuing. It's an ongoing problem, and we are in ground zero right here in O'Brien County. This township, the neighboring townships around Sutherland in this area of the county, there is more land that is publicly held here than almost anywhere else in the state. So I mean, partly it's a hot topic because this is kind of a worst case scenario of what's happened when you don't rein in the county and the state, and they make use of these deep pocket private foundations to buy up the land. It is a real problem.
Thank you.
I don't know if I would have a ton to add. I would just reiterate, maybe it's worth repeating myself, maybe not, but just, having some type of government oversight over the DNR. And so they would have to come to some type of oversight committee to say, yeah, we want to buy this land, and then hopefully, I'm scared to even say this, but hopefully we trust the government officials on the committee to say, well, that is weird that how you're purchasing it, so no, the DNR does not get to buy that land. I mean, the patrol has to go to, right, the Department of Public Safety. If we want a new airplane, we have to go to the legislature and explain to them why we want a new airplane. And if they're like, well, that's stupid, you already got 3, which we don't get 2. But, well, you don't need another one. See, and you don't get another airplane. And so that's kind of my mentality behind it. And so if we could somehow get the DNR to come to the legislature and be like, well, we want to purchase this land in O'Brien County, and then the legislature looks into it and they're like, well, no, you don't get to do that. Like the state government funds the Department of Public Safety, right? The state government funds the State Department of Natural Resources. And so if we can somehow say, we're not going to give you the money to buy that, it might be a way. Again, I'm not saying it is the way, but it might be a good place to start. So,
I got a question, or a little bit of a comment here. The history of this DNR in Waterton Township started in '86, and they had a big meeting at the Legion Hall, and they were going to make this beautiful prairie, and it was going to have walking trails, it was going to have all this, and we were going to have tour buses come in to see this beautiful prairie. I'm still waiting for the first tour bus.
Good question. And maybe Lynn and I are only old enough to maybe think about this, but I thought back in the day that one of the reasons to start Powerball was to help support DNR projects. Is that right? Okay. So all these other 13%, 14%, so on that we heard earlier is why don't they go back to the original concept and they want to fund those things, fund them with Powerball money. Because I'm with Lynn on the sales tax thing. I think that is just ungodly almost because it hurts the people that we need to be helping the most. And the other thing I think we need to keep in mind or be aware of and maybe do something is foreign influence. Like China coming in and buying all kinds of farm ground. And is there any efforts in that regard to keep track or, nip it in the bud or whatever at this point?
Yeah, there are bills.
Yeah, several things there. So, when it comes to Powerball, I hear that a lot about a lot of different projects, and I love Liz's answer to the part of it, right? Because what I hear often is, well, we're supposed to fund education with Powerball money, and part of it, right? And oh, we're supposed to fund, well, part of it, you know, and over the years, it's just kind of gotten figured out to different groups. And one of the most interesting debates that I witnessed at the Capitol was, it was one that I think the Democrats were in control, was about divvying out Powerball money. And at the time, the proposal was to give it to help fund the veterans home, right? And people were very, very nervous, not because they didn't want to fund the veterans home, but because it's not a stable source of income, right? And so when we're talking about using Powerball money to fund education, oh boy, because that money goes high and low, and it's very volatile, right? And so it gets a little tricky. Now, when it comes to land acquisition, I don't think I care as much, right? But we just have to be careful about that. It's not a guarantee. Oh, okay. Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point about foreign investment. We do have some laws on the books there, but I think they really need to be tightened up. And we did have one, and I think we passed it out of state government this last legislative session, but it didn't make it. I don't really think we passed it out, but in any case, yeah, we need to tighten up that language. But there again, we've got to be careful, right? Because we have landowners, that are hometown kids, right? But they're from our area, but they might just live in Texas, right? So we want to be able for them to be able to own farmland back home, or be able to inherit farmland from their parents. But at the same time, we don't want absentee landowners that are going to take care of the property, that don't care, and that aren't going to be legal landowners. And so, it's finding that line, right, between someone who just lives in Texas versus someone who lives in Texas but their heart is back home. That makes sense.
Okay.
I have one last question, but before I pose the question, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, coming out to, should I say Northwest Iowa, should I say Gaza, Iowa, on a brisk winter January evening, and you're all to be commended. And I want to thank our senators and representatives for your time and for all that you do and for the relationships that we're trying to build here. Two other things back on the table, there's a few brochures. You're welcome to take any of that. You don't have to agree with any of it, but we would ask that you consider the content. And then the last thing, I've passed around some of these cards. Really would like to have your names and email addresses or texting information if you want to do it that way. Because we will be doing more of these forums in the future, as long as we keep these people, I won't say it's happy. We need to make us happy.
Yeah. You're going to say, don't make us do that. You're supposed to make us a little uncomfortable.
Well, we hopefully achieved a little bit of that, yes. But this has been good, and myself, I really appreciated some of the emotion that you people gave us. Because I want these people to understand, our senators and representatives, to understand these issues are important to us. So I want to thank you for all of that. So, the last question, and I think this is a good question to end with, because this would be an issue that was near to the heart of our outgoing representative, Bush. So, I'll just read the question the way it was handed. Mental health is a disaster. Structure, funding, and access, especially beds for acute needs, is unsatisfactory. Too much of the burden is on law enforcement and on hospitals. What do you propose to fix this?
Yeah, one of the big issues is workforce. Getting people to come out to rural Iowa, we're in northwest Iowa, but anywhere in rural Iowa, to practice, and then to remain there for any period of time is a big issue. It's hard to recruit them in, and then they don't stay very long. So I'm talking to psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health therapists, those type of professions. So what happens is, if you are in need of therapy, you tell your story to your therapist, right? And then a year later, that therapist leaves, you have a new therapist. So what do you have to do? You have to tell your story all over again. And I've heard this say, it's not my story, I've read this story all across this voter district of that occurring. And in some cases, your nearest accessible good therapy may take you as far as Sioux Falls or Mason City. And I mean, that's just unreasonable. So we need to be looking at ways to incentivize people to come out into rural Iowa, practice and remain here for a period of time, whether that be incremental grants that are given to them if they relocate, or forgivable loans if they're just coming out of university setting. If they stay out here for 5 years, then each year a percentage of their loan will be paid off until that's completed. I know they did open up in the last session, 19 slots at the University of Iowa for psychiatric study, which, okay, that's not very many, and that doesn't guarantee that they're going to come out our direction. So what guarantees can we put on that they will come to rural Iowa? So yeah, that's the direction I want to go with it, is incentivizing people to come out here and stay for a period of time to practice.
So as somebody who is a fiscal conservative, and as somebody who is a constitutionalist who believes that if we're going to have a written set of rules, we ought to follow those rules. If I were a legislator in Washington, D.C., I think I would routinely vote no on just about everything that Congress votes on, because I think there has been so much overreach. We're worse than broke at the federal level. We're so deeply in the hole that I think even all the well-meaning bills that Republicans tend to introduce, most of them should not be passed. Maybe we need to put a moratorium on new legislation in Washington for a while. But it is different at the state level. I mean, the 10th Amendment cuts both ways. It says if it's not mentioned as a responsibility of Congress and the federal government, then it's left to the states or the people, right? But then that means the state governments need to step up to the plate, and what we call police powers, which traditionally are things like not just safety and law enforcement, but health, welfare. Those were traditional responsibilities of the states, and I think it's good to push back against the feds when they intrude in those traditional areas, including education. But then that also means that we have to pay attention to these problems. And I agree 100% with that question, the way it's worded. It is a crisis. We have a mental health crisis in our state. You cannot place people who are troubled and who need treatment, desperately need treatment. You can't find beds for them. You know, you can, it's one thing to see a social worker, a therapist of some sort, a psychologist, to get treatment on an ongoing basis. But the acute cases, where somebody should be institutionalized for their own safety and the safety of others around them, you can't find them anymore. And so I think part of it is, as conservative as I am, I think we need to adequately fund these places. I'm thinking, locally we have one in Cherokee, and we, instead of cutting and closing down these places, we need to enlarge and more fully fund those places. So I think we need to step up, and if that means we spend more of our money, the $2 billion that we have in the bank at the moment, I think that we need to open up the coffers a little bit, because this isn't just about helping those who are desperately in need. It also benefits all of us, the families of people who are troubled emotionally and mentally, but also the communities, because a lot of the crime that we have, some of the worst violent crime that we have, is coming from people who are mentally ill. And so I think we need to adequately fund it, and I don't think we have been so far.
Okay, I have a long answer. I'm going to try to condense it down. It's complicated. I mean, no one's saying it's simple. One of the first things I did campaign-wise is I toured MHI and Cuso. Down in Cherokee, I toured it twice, and I intend to go back. I asked the director there, I don't remember his name. You guys remember him? I don't remember his name. And so if you know his name and I get it wrong, I apologize. But I said, everybody asks for money. What's your second biggest issue? And he said, there's a lot of people here that don't need to be here. And if we could incentivize a way to have them in some type of, what I would call, what he was describing is like a discipleship house. I want to say on one point, and it's probably not a popular answer, but it's the answer that's on my heart, so I'm going to give it to you. This isn't just a government solve my problems issue. The government isn't always the answer. Do we actually, as a culture and society, care about people struggling with these issues? I would argue, we kind of just, and not that it's a disingenuous question at all, I think it's a legitimate question, but I think oftentimes what we do with this issue and a lot of other issues is, my golly, how's the government going to fix this one? It's like, well, maybe it's an us problem. There's a lot of people, per the director of MHI, that don't have to be there. But it's the only place they can go. Because nobody else is willing to take care of them, help them. I mean, we even had the conversation of, could it be some form of regimented halfway house? Because it just, like, man, we just need to make sure that Jeff takes his meds. That's it. You have people at MHI that they're there because they don't have anybody else who's willing to step up and be like, you know what, Jeff, I'm taking your meds today, how you doing? Well, I'm doing just fine, yeah. And then he goes to work and he's not a bed at MHI. Like, this is a cultural turnaround issue just as much as it is, how can the government help issue? I'm going to get off my soapbox here soon. 2, we are only to blame when we go to MHI, and I include Cuso into it. Cuso is the sex offender side of the Cherokee facility. You can't just continue to treat people the same way and expect different results. Like, I walked in there, and hopefully y'all know me well enough. I try to be, as a sinful, broken man, I walk with the Lord as closely as I can. But like when I go into MHI and Cuso, and there's this giant pagan symbol on the wall, well, these people aren't getting better. That should be a cultural duh moment. It was for me. Like, we have just decided that we can only treat people in a subjective, secular way. And guess what? They're not getting better. Shocker. That should surprise no one. Like, we can't continue, and I'm not saying we turn MHI into a Christian facility. That's not what I'm arguing. But what I am saying is we live in a culture now that the standards are subjective. And I'll publicly say it, just because it's my stance, but our culture says, do you feel like a cat today? Oh, okay, well, you're not a cat. That's the treatment. Now, I don't want to be so dogmatic about that, but what I'm saying is rather than just tell people that, yeah, that's just fine, like, no. Like, I love how Jordan Peterson puts it, the therapist isn't there to validate your problems. The therapist is not there, it's not his role to validate why you're there. He's there to help you move away from what is causing the issue in your life. That's even from a secular therapist like Jordan Peterson. So my point in saying all of that is to wrap all of it up. I am willing to fund MHI. I am willing to fund QSO. But it's on them to come to me and say, we are willing to explore different means of treatment. We're willing to explore different options to help these people rather than just say, well, we medicated this guy and now he's here. And you didn't deal with the problem. But that's just how we've chosen to deal with it. And so, on the flip side, it's, I want to see these facilities explore what is actually going to help these people, rather than just say, this is what we do, and this is what we've always done, and so now they're here. Well, okay, they're still here, so what you're doing is not working. And so, but the flip side of that is, and this is where I'll stop, I'm sorry, is we have to be willing to take these people, not into our homes, I'm not saying, that's not what I'm saying, but we have to care about these people as a culture. We have to care about these people as a society, and we can't just say it's their problem. Because now you have MHI beds that are taken up by people that don't need to be there. And so, I don't know, we need to take a more prompt approach at it, I guess. So, sorry.
I really appreciate that answer, because I think we will ultimately be judged by how we treat the least among us. And when someone is going through a difficult situation, it's upon us as a community, as a society, not necessarily as a government, but to come forward and help resolve some of those issues. And we have some amazing nonprofits in our area. You know, Atlas and Spencer comes to mind. I think Atlas is in the Sioux Center. Wonderful organizations that really tackle these difficult issues from a multi-pronged approach, really, and from a family perspective, from an addiction perspective, from a mental health perspective. We are so very fortunate in our area to have those entities, but we need to help them, right? And I don't know if government is the answer necessarily, but certainly there are ways, you know, through contracting out services and things like that that we can help them out. I don't think that there's an easy answer to solve our mental health problems in our state, but a couple of things that I have worked on. I'll be introducing a bill with Representative John Wills on non-compete agreements, and this is the lawyer in me, but I've had so many constituents come to me and say, I'm in the world of mental health, I'm a provider, but when I graduated from my program, I got a really great job, and I signed a non-compete agreement. That non-compete agreement says that upon leaving that entity, that they can't practice within 200 miles for 2 years. 2 years. So you know what they do? You know what these young people do? They start working there and they realize that it's not what they thought it was. Maybe they didn't get along with their boss. Maybe they just, you know, they got a better job elsewhere or whatnot. But if they can't practice within 100 or 200 miles of our community, you know where they go? They leave. And then they meet someone elsewhere, and they go have their babies elsewhere, and then they fund their schools elsewhere, and they don't think about our community again. Those people, their clients, have lost their provider, and we've lost a valuable member of our community. We've lost kids in our school system. These non-compete agreements need to go. I believe in the free market, and I believe that people should have the opportunity to earn a wage, because I don't want them being a government assistance. These people will have degrees. We need their services in our state, but because of a contract by a greedy entity, by a greedy employer, they can't make a salary. They can't put food on the table for their family, so they can leave elsewhere. And I can't tell you how many providers have come to me and said, I'm locked out. I can't, they'll sue me. And you know what? These are young folks. They don't have a lawyer on call, let alone the ability to fight demand, right? So we need to buckle down when it comes to the free market and let these people earn a salary, because we need them here.
those providers here. We don't need those silly contracts. Another thing that I'm working on, we need to reimburse for providers who are outside of our state. Particularly Spencer has a bureau relationship with Sioux Falls, but if that provider isn't licensed in Iowa, they might be sitting at their desk in South Dakota and Zooming with a child in Iowa. No, they don't, actually they're licensed, since they're not licensed in Iowa, they're actually practicing outside of their abilities. The state of Iowa is becoming cracked down on them. And we continue to take cracks at licensure reform, but we really need to get serious about that. And sitting on the Administrative Rules Review Committee, I see, we really try hard to make it easier for people to practice in our state, but we really need to buckle down on that because, especially in the world of mental health, because when a kid has a problem, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're in Iowa or if they're in South Dakota. They need a helper. And we owe that to that kid to find them that helper. And I guess I don't care what state arbitrary boundary that person sits on, or if they have a license in South Dakota. We need to find a way to wave them into Iowa because we need them here. And if it's just as simple as saying, well, your license is contingent upon where you're sitting, not where the kid is sitting, then that's fine. But we need to think outside the box on some of these things because we need those providers.
Thank you. Well, friends, it's 9:14. I think you probably have an appreciation for these people, their passion, their willingness to come here and be a little uncomfortable at times. And I think you have an appreciation for these people that care enough to come out between the holidays on a less than perfect day, night, in a remote location. Thank you, and thank you. And to those that put this on, thank you. And I know that you will want to talk with these people and they want to talk to you. I hope you can be available, get some names, some numbers. I found them all to be very accessible and interested in you. So thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you.